Crack! The sound of blue knuckles slamming into an alien face rang through the halls of Hawking Interspecies Academy. Zorax, the hulking Krell, stood over Pryla, the meek Elysian he had just pummeled. Flecks of pale blue blood stained the floor. Other students stared, but none dared intervene, except one. Jake Thompson, a 16-year-old human, pushed through the crowd. He had seen enough of his Federation buddy being abused just for struggling with math and science. Even if it meant risking expulsion from the prestigious academy in 2257 AD, Jake refused to let this injustice go on any longer. "Back off, lizard brain, before I put my fist through your skull," Jake growled at Zorax. The Krell snarled, his forked tongue flicking. Elysians like Pryla may have advanced empathic abilities, but Krell saw emotions as weakness, and they despised weakness. Pryla looked up at Jake with watery eyes, a trickle of blood running from his nose. He tried to pull himself to his feet, but slumped back down. If this vicious bullying continued, Pryla wouldn't survive the semester. Jake knew he might be the aliens' only hope at this school, where humans were the sole species who still valued compassion over cold-blooded rationality. He had promised to be Pryla's Federation buddy. Now it was time to uphold that oath, no matter the cost. Balling his fists, Jake stepped forward to confront the much larger bully. The circle of onlooking students fell silent. A human was about to defend an alien. There was no going back now. Jake and Zorax stood in the headmaster's office, under the stern gaze of Dr. Rixos, a Vulpine known for his strict adherence to the Academy's rules. The fox-like alien's ears twitched as he addressed the two students. "I am deeply disappointed in both of your actions today," Dr. Rixos said, his voice firm. "Particularly you, Mr. Thompson. Violence is never an acceptable solution to conflict." Jake clenched his fists, meeting the headmaster's eyes. "I was defending Pryla, sir. Zorax has been bullying him for weeks, and I couldn't stand by and watch it happen anymore." Zorax scoffed, his scales glinting in the office light. "We were just joking around with the little Elysian. Thompson here overreacted." Dr. Rixos narrowed his eyes. "Regardless of the circumstances, fighting on school grounds is a serious offense. I should expel both of you." Jake's heart sank. Expulsion would mean losing his chance at a future in the Federation. The headmaster leaned back in his chair. "However, I believe there may be a better solution. To foster understanding between you two, I'm assigning a joint project. You will work together to create a presentation on the importance of interspecies cooperation." "What?" Jake and Zorax exclaimed in unison, glaring at each other. "Oh, you heard me. Either complete this project together or face expulsion. The choice is yours." Reluctantly, the two students nodded, accepting their punishment. As they left the office, Zorax shoved past Jake, hissing, "Watch your back, human, this isn't over." Jake squared his shoulders. "Bring it on, lizard, I'll be ready for anything you try." Later that day, Pryla approached Jake after class. His head hung low. "Jake, I'm so sorry for causing you trouble. Let me help with the project, as a way to make it up to you." Jake smiled, placing a hand on Pryla's shoulder. "It's not your fault, Pryla. I'd be happy to have your help. Why don't we work on it at my place?" As they collaborated on the project, Jake discovered that Pryla's empathic abilities gave him unique insights into interspecies relations. Pryla, in turn, marveled at Jake's grasp of math and engineering. Working side by side, the two formed a strong bond, their friendship growing with each shared experience and lesson learned. Jake and Pryla huddled over the glowing screen, their eyes scanning the data they had collected. Graphs and charts filled the display, painting a picture that challenged everything they thought they knew about the Krell. "I'm sensing something, Jake," Pryla said, his voice soft and distant. "It's not just anger or aggression coming from Zorax and his friends. There's fear, too. A deep, overwhelming fear." Jake furrowed his brow. "Fear? What could they possibly be afraid of? They're the ones terrorizing everyone else." Pryla closed his eyes, focusing his empathic abilities. "It's not that simple. The Krell society values strength above all else. Weakness is seen as a disgrace. something to be ridiculed and cast out. He opened his eyes, meeting Jake's gaze. Zorax and the others, they're not bullying others because they enjoy it. They're doing it to prove their worth, to show their families and peers that they're strong enough to belong. Jake leaned back in his chair, processing this revelation. He had always assumed that the Krell were just naturally aggressive, that their bullying was a result of their inherent nature. But as he thought back to his interactions with Zorax, he began to see the cracks in the Krell's tough exterior. The way Zorax's eyes would dart around the room, as if searching for approval from his friends, the slight tremor in his voice when he challenged Jake, betraying a hint of uncertainty beneath the bravado. "You're right," Jake said, his voice filled with newfound understanding. "They're not just bullies, they're scared too, scared of being seen as weak, of losing their place in their society." Pryler nodded, a sad smile on his face. "Empathy is the key, Jake. If we can show them that we understand their struggles, that we're here to support them, maybe we can break this cycle of aggression." Jake stood up, a determined look in his eyes. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll change our project, focus on the root causes of conflict and the power of empathy. We'll show everyone that compassion is the way forward, not violence." Over the next few weeks, Jake and Pryler threw themselves into their new project. They interviewed students from every species, listening to their stories and struggles. They heard tales of family pressure, societal expectations, and the constant fear of failure. Even the Krell opened up, their tough facades crumbling as they confessed their deepest insecurities. Zorax, in a moment of vulnerability, admitted that he never wanted to hurt anyone. He just didn't know any other way to prove his worth. As the day of the presentation arrived, Jake and Pryler stood before their classmates, their hearts racing with anticipation. They spoke of the pain they had witnessed, the hidden fears that drove so many to lash out at others. But they also spoke of hope, of the power of understanding and compassion. They argued that true strength lay not in domination, but in the courage to be vulnerable, to reach out and support one another. As they finished their presentation, the room erupted in applause. Students and faculty alike rose to their feet, their faces filled with emotion. And there, in the back of the room, stood Zorax and his friends, their eyes glistening with tears as they nodded in agreement. For the first time, Jake saw them not as bullies, but as fellow students struggling to find their place in a world that demanded so much of them, and he knew with a certainty that filled his heart that this was only the beginning of a new era of understanding and cooperation at Hawking Interspecies Academy. The thunderous applause following their presentation still echoed in Jake and Pryler's minds as they walked through the halls of Hawking Interspecies Academy. The impact of their words hung in the air, a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the school. Students of all species huddled together, discussing the presentation with a newfound sense of understanding and compassion. Jake turned to Pryler, a grin spreading across his face. "We did it, Pryler. We actually got through to them." Pryler nodded, his own smile mirroring Jake's. I could feel it, the change in their emotions. It was like a wave of empathy washing over the room. As they walked, an idea began to form in Jake's mind. What if we don't stop here? What if we keep this momentum going, create a space where students can continue to learn from each other and build these connections? Pryler's eyes widened. Like a club? A place where we can promote empathy and understanding among all species? Exactly, Jake exclaimed. We could call it the Interspecies Empathy Alliance, or IEA for short. Over the next few weeks, Jake and Pryler worked tirelessly to establish the IEA. They recruited members from every corner of the academy, including some of the Krell who had previously been involved in bullying. Zorax, to their surprise, was one of the first to join, his once menacing demeanor replaced by a quiet determination to make amends. The IEA quickly became a hub of activity, hosting language exchanges where students could learn to communicate with each other's native tongues, cultural festivals celebrating the diverse traditions of the Academy's many species, and community service projects that brought students together in the spirit of cooperation and goodwill. As the club's reputation grew, so too did its impact on the school. Incidents of bullying and interspecies conflict began to decline, replaced by a growing sense of camaraderie and understanding. One day, as Jake and Pryla were planning their next event, a message arrived from the Galactic Federation. They had been invited to speak at the annual Youth Conference on Earth, a gathering of students from across the galaxy. "This is incredible," Jake exclaimed, his eyes scanning the invitation. "Can you imagine the impact we could have sharing our message with students from every corner of the Federation?" Pryla nodded, his own excitement palpable. "It's a huge opportunity. We'll need to prepare, research the cultures and histories of the species that will be there." For weeks they pored over databases and archives, learning everything they could about the diverse array of species that would be represented at the conference. They crafted a comprehensive presentation, weaving together the lessons they had learned at the Academy with the broader themes of empathy and interspecies cooperation. As they stepped onto the stage at the conference, Jake and Pryla were met with a sea of faces, some curious, others skeptical. They began their presentation, sharing their own experiences and the impact the IEA had had on their school. Some students, particularly those from more aggressive species, challenged their ideas. A hulking Zorgoth stood up, his voice booming across the auditorium. "Empathy is weakness. The strong do not concern themselves with the feelings of the weak." Jake met the Zorgoth's gaze, his voice calm but firm. "Strength comes in many forms. The strength to understand, to connect, to build bridges instead of walls. That is the true power of empathy." Other students began to share their own stories, tales of friendships forged across cultural barriers, of understanding born from the willingness to listen and learn. The tide of the conference began to turn, a growing sense of unity and purpose filling the room. But as the conference progressed, a group of radical Krell students began to make their presence known. Led by a charismatic and manipulative leader named Drazak, they pushed their way to the front of the auditorium, their voices rising in anger. "For the Krell way is the only way," Drazak shouted, his eyes blazing with fury. "Strength through dominance, power through force. These weak-minded fools would have us abandon our heritage, our very identity." Drazak's followers began to chant, their voices growing louder and more aggressive. They surged forward, pushing past the other students, their clawed hands clenched into fists. Jake and Pryla exchanged a glance, the gravity of the situation sinking in. They had to act fast, find a way to diffuse the tension before it erupted into violence. The future of the conference, and perhaps the very fate of interspecies relations, hung in the balance. Jake pushed his way through the throng of agitated students, Pryla close behind him. The auditorium was in chaos, the air thick with shouts and the acrid stench of fear. Drazak stood at the center of it all, his eyes wild, his voice rising above the din. "Drazak!" Jake yelled, his voice raw. "This has to stop now." The Krell leader spun to face him, his lip curled in a sneer. "Well, well, the great peacemakers. Come to preach your weakness to the masses." Jake stood his ground. "It's not weakness to understand others, to feel their pain. That's what makes us strong." Drazak laughed, a harsh grating sound. "You know nothing of strength, human. The Krell have survived by being the fiercest, the most ruthless. That is our way." Pryla stepped forward, his voice calm. "But at what cost, Drazak? How many have suffered for your pride?" The Krell's eyes narrowed. "What would you know of our suffering, Elysian? Your kind hides behind your empathy, using it as a crutch." Jake had an idea, a dangerous one, but it might be their only chance. "Then let's settle this, a debate here and now, you against us. We'll see whose way is truly stronger." Drazak considered for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, I'll enjoy watching you squirm." The students formed a circle around them, the tension palpable. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had to make this count. "Empathy isn't a weakness," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "It's a strength. It allows us to understand each other, to work together. I've seen it firsthand at our academy." He told stories of the friendships he'd seen forged, the barriers broken down, of Zorax and the other Krell who had joined the IEA, learning to see past their aggression. Drazak scoffed. Pretty words, but the galaxy doesn't care for your feelings. It's a harsh place and only the strong survive. The Krell have known this for millennia. He spoke of great Krell warriors, of battles won and enemies crushed, of the glory of conquest and the shame of defeat. Back and forth they went, trading barbs and anecdotes. The crowd watched rapt as the two sides clashed. But something was wrong. Pryla could feel it, a dark undercurrent in Drazak's emotions. Anger, yes, and pride. But beneath that, something deeper, something painful. He focused, letting his empathic senses reach out, and then he saw it. A memory buried deep. A young Drazak, surrounded by a gang of bullies, not Krell but others. They taunted him, beat him, left him bleeding in the dirt. Pryla's heart ached. He knew that pain all too well, the humiliation, the helplessness, the rage. He met Drazak's gaze, his voice soft. I understand, Drazak, the pain you carry, the fear, you're not alone. The Krell's eyes widened, then narrowed. You dare invade my mind, Elysian? You dare pity me? Pryla shook his head. Not pity, empathy. I've felt that same pain, that same anger, but I learned to let it go, to find strength in understanding, not violence. Drazak roared, his face contorted with rage. He lunged at Pryla, claws outstretched. Jake moved without thinking, throwing himself between them. He felt the impact, the searing pain as Drazak's claws raked his flesh. They tumbled to the ground, grappling, blood spattering the floor. The crowd surged forward, shouts of alarm filling the air. Security guards pushed through, dragging Drazak and his followers away. Medics knelt beside Jake, assessing his injuries. Pryla was there, tears streaking his face. Jake, I'm so sorry. I wasn't strong enough. I let my abilities hurt you. Jake grimaced, his arm hanging at a sickening angle. No, Pryla, you did the right thing. The truth is always worth it. The medics loaded Jake onto a stretcher, carrying him away. Pryla followed, his heart heavy. He knew the road ahead would be hard, harder than ever. But as he looked out at the faces of the students, at the dawning understanding in their eyes, he knew it was a road they had to walk, for the sake of the galaxy and for each other. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.